morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are and however you may be listening, whether it's your first time tuning in or you listen and watch every single day. Thank you for spending your time here with us. This is the Water Online Show, powered by Water Online, the leading online destination for the water and wastewater market. I am your host, Travis Kennedy, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, chief editor here at Water Online, Mr. Kevin Westerling.
What's up, Travis? Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's quite a day. It's very warm outside, so there's a lot of people out there trying to get stuff done and sweating quite a bit. It's probably the warmest day we've seen here in the Northeast for all year since last summer. But we are trying to get through it, making us a little lethargic, but we have our caffeine fix here ready for this afternoon show. And I was thinking this morning, as I was coming into the office and thinking about this show, in this world, there are things that are forever going to be linked. There's peanut butter and jelly. There's movies and popcorn. There's Philadelphia Eagles fans and booing Santa Claus. Another example, if I could be market specific for a minute, is environment, water infrastructure, and budgets. And here's what I mean. In his testimony to Congress, Jesse Keenan, one of the nation's leading scholars on climate change and as it relates to real estate and environmental issues related to that, highlighted the escalating costs associated with climate-induced impacts on water systems. So that could be obviously hurricanes, blizzards, floods, that type of thing. One of the things that he projected is that by 2050, the U.S. could face an additional 50 billion with a B, not an M. We're talking 50 billion. If I could get my Dr. Evil on for a second, 50 billion annually in electricity production costs due to increased demands for water recycling. That's a pretty phenomenal amount. It's a number that's really difficult to get your head around. I mean, there's water recycling, desalination, extending pumping distances for drinking water. There's all kinds of things that are going to need investment related to this type of thing. These expenses really are anticipated to be transferred to utility ratepayers. Yeah. So that's one thing that I sort of want to dive into. That's just going to exasperate financial burdens, especially in vulnerable communities, communities that we've talked about on this show previously. And that's just accounting for the status quo, the foreseen. What we haven't started to talk about is the cost for the unforeseen. So currently, there are preparations underway, with that being said, to either reform or possibly eliminate the Federal Emergency Management Agencies, also known as FEMA, which raises a whole lot of questions, not a lot of answers at this point. What we talk about on this show, or at least try to do, is not only identify what is happening within certain sub-ecosystems of the water market, but also bring people in that are smarter than us to explain how certain events may or may not impact how you manage your systems. We've brought in two of the industry's leading thought leaders for you today. They were nice enough to join us and to help shed some light on what municipalities and local governments might be dealing with in the not too distant future and offer ways to move forward in solving these problems. Joining us on the Water Online Hotline today is Jesse Keenan, professor of sustainable real estate and urban planning at Tulane University, the Green Wave, and Edgar Westerhof, vice president with Arcadis and serves as the North America solution leader for climate adaptation. Gentlemen, welcome to the Water Online Show.
Great to be on the show.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's a party because I know that Jesse and I connected at in New Orleans on a flight back from New Orleans. He was doing some of his work there at Tulane, and I was coming back from the largest domestic wastewater centric show, and also known as WevTech. And we got to talking about some of the implications related to environment, water, and urban development. One of the things that's why I kind of wanted to start here, Jesse, with you, if it's okay. Could you talk about the financial implications related to water infrastructure adaptation? So when I talked in the beginning, we said there's a lot of things to consider, right? There's a lot of implications, especially financial, related to infrastructure. So what should we be thinking about as an industry as a whole? What specifics can you offer?
Yeah, so thank you for having me today. And it may be a good place to cite, or to start rather, is what you cited in terms of that $50 billion price tag. That's not my work. That's actually the work that's gone on in the federal government that helps guide strategic deployment of federal dollars to invest in infrastructure. And that relates to increased energy costs, not just for water recycling, but really just pumping water farther distances. Miami-Dade County, for instance, something like 10% of the budget of Miami-Dade County is just paying the price of moving water around, right?
Oh, it's going up
Stormwater.
10%.
Yeah, it's an enormous cost. It's extremely energy intensive. Water at all different stages and levels and degrees of processing. But when we start stepping back and we think, okay, what does climate change and extreme weather, not all extreme weather is attributed to climate change, but what are these changes in the environment? What does it really represent from us? Bottom line. Well, there's a couple different ways to approach this. One is that we have increased costs for water itself in the context of water scarcity,
Hmm.
right? And we see all across this country, Texas, Arizona, California, groundwater withdrawal much faster, obviously, than one could replenish in the reserves. A lot of imbalances in supply and demand at the end of the day, and that adds costs, right? And those water, whether we talk about water rights or just the sheer distance to hook up one municipal water utility to another utility, as we see in Texas, the kind of networking and the processing of wholesale sellers of water, more or less. So scarcity, that's the first thing. The other component of this, life cycle costs, right? We're seeing, whether it's extreme heat, it's tropical cyclones, it's hail, whatever. There's any number of physical impacts that are physically impacting our material and infrastructural systems. That adds costs. It reduces useful life. We have greater O&M costs all along the way. That's increasing at the end of the day our unit costs for the production and processing of water, wastewater, and the like. So that's a key component. Another component is, guess what? Money's not getting cheaper anytime soon, right?
Right.
And particularly for municipalities or municipal utilities that are in high risk areas where the
Hmm.
municipal bond market is already being observed to impose a risk premium on these places, right? I remember sitting down on Wall Street one time. This is more than a decade ago, with a bond buyer who probably had about 40% of the bond index market and was looking through the day's issuances, right? Looking at bond counsel letters and opinions and things like that. And he came across the Key West Aqueduct Authority. And he
Hmm.
said, do I really want to own this? And he pulled up the NOAA Sea Level Rise Viewer, which is a very simple toggle sort of
Right.
map, right? You just put in 3 feet of sea level rise. What does that look like? And he
Oh
did
boy.
this and he looked at the facilities in Key West. He said, I got a 10-year call, I don't know, 20-year bond, whatever it was.
Hmm.
Do I really want to own this thing? And he put in about 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 feet of sea level rise just to see what it looked like. And for him, in 15 minutes of due diligence, which I wouldn't say is terribly scientific or technical in that sense, he passed. And when you control that much of the market, buying up these things and indexing them, that has implications when you pass over that. So, but forget that. All across the marketplace of municipal bonds, we're starting to see risk premiums added. So, at every level, from capital markets all the way down to the assets and the systems from day-to-day operations, we're seeing increased costs, CapEx and OpEx at the end of the day. And that's gonna impact everybody's bottom line.
So just to add some color to what you said, you mentioned risk premiums a couple times in there. So I of course know what that is. Kevin of course knows what that is. We're usually
All my investments, sure.
we're usually the dumbest guys in the room. Me especially. But talk a little bit about risk premiums and how is that defined in the water wastewater market?
It's the same as it is everywhere. It's risk and return.
Hmm.
Whether I'm investing in debt or equity, I've got to balance my risks with my returns. And there's all kinds of risks. There's risks of default. There's risks of delinquency. There's, any number of risks that can manifest themselves, particularly for utilities. By the way, we actually saw a major default in a water utility in Texas this year because of a drought.
Is that right?
Yeah, so
Man,
this is, I say this year, actually 2024.
right.
We're already in 2025. So this is real. And so if I'm going to make an investment, I want to have a premium to offset that risk or at least account for that risk. And it's not always large numbers or large percentages, but it adds up. And every little bit adds up when we're talking about increased costs, particularly for borrowing. And
Yeah.
that's the implication at the end of the day. Your interest rate just goes up and you pay more interest on your debt.
Right. No good. And you talked earlier about ratepayers also paying more because all these climate issues are water issues, right? And so I wonder with all the stuff that is coming, and we know it is, um, like what policy wise or funding wise that's available to municipalities, where do we stand as far as shortfalls and what we need versus what we're getting? And maybe now's a good time for Edgar to jump in. And do you have thoughts on that, Edgar?
Let me first say it's an honor to be on the show today, definitely along here with Mr. Jesse Keenan, one of the leading voices discussing the topics here today. But maybe, allow me to take a bit of a step back. I'm from Dutch origin, as you may be able to tell from the tone of my voice. And, as we talk about policy and funding, or in less popular words, obeying the law and paying taxes. We don't like that. As a society, we don't like that. We don't like it in the US. We don't like it in the Netherlands either. But we do have strong laws as it comes to water management in the Netherlands. And we have a very clear capital plan as it comes to annual allocations to, what it is that we are trying to maintain and improve, because that is what adaptation stands for. As a matter of fact, the Dutch pay 1.5% annually of their GDP to water management. Wow. And it's not being questioned. Water management sits really at every level of governance. It's the state level, the city level, the country level. We have dedicated water boards who have been practicing this for hundreds of years. So when you talk policy and funding to a Dutch person, who has been in the US now for 13 years and counting, that's always, a starting point in my brain. What does this mean? And I think, what I've been seeing in the US first is, people are extremely dedicated who work with water utilities, who work in the water space, extremely dedicated to do their jobs, whether it's the public sector or the private sector, the public sector and private sector. They're very dedicated. And that is something, to build on. It's a fantastic, strong baseline. At the same time, we see how aging infrastructure, how, the aging workforce are creeping up on us. So a bit, back to, Jesse's explanation on financing and other problems that we are seeing. That is something we need to overcome. We need to address. There's an urgency around climate preparedness. So if you don't have your workforce in place to work on these challenges, we are not in a good place. If the laws are not up to standard, up to par to overcome what is ahead of us, we will be in trouble in our urban center. So I would say, as a number one and number two, that is, I would say, vitally important. And maybe like a third aspect, it's, we need to be looking at solutions at scale much more clearly. We tend to be blindfolded by small changes in our streetscape, for example. I sometimes use an example of a biosphere, right? Fantastic interventions. We love them. Yeah. But it's not going to save lives if, say, a Hurricane Ida and Hurricane Harvey is coming to us. And that is the hurricane season ahead of us. NOAA predicts an above average season. Well, I've traveled the US last year. Last year was a number second of most extreme years we've had. Extremely costly, close to 600 casualties. So an above average season. I'm holding my breath, and we all realize in the industry that, it's an all hands effort.
Yeah. And I think we have smart enough people, yourself included, in Arcadis, that could solve these problems, but money is always going to be an issue, right? And Jesse did a good job of laying out what it could look like if we don't fix these things. So the issue being that currently, and Travis mentioned this in his intro, that some financial assistance is being scaled back. Mentioned FEMA, state revolving funds have been cut for the next fiscal year. And so, with that being said, and all the implications that are ahead of us, do you have either of you have any suggestions of how states should prepare for what's coming based on the funding situation as current?
Yeah, I would say that what you noted, particularly with the state revolving loan funds, that's tremendous. You know, by one estimate, we need $2 trillion of capex investment in this country to bring through the balance of this decade, which doesn't have that many more years left, to bring our water up to basically safe water drinking standards, right? And we're probably way behind on the just that $2 trillion price tag. So at the end of the day, states are going to have to put up their own money into these revolving loan funds. They're going to have to come up with pooled mechanisms for those states that can afford it to be able to offer a lot different lines of credit and sub facilities to local governments and counties. I think we're going to have to reorganize the scale deployment of this capital and who's managing what. I think we've already seen some utility consolidation in some areas, and I think we'll continue to see more utility consolidation as particularly coastal utilities just are upside down
Yeah.
in a lot of different ways. So, you know, they're going to do what they have to do out of necessity. We're going to see bankruptcies. We're going to see receiverships. We're going to see the states coming in and managing these assets. And you know, where the federal government retreats, eventually the politics will hit Washington, and Washington will probably bring money back in. But in the context of FEMA and post disasters, and it's debatable what happens here. We all know that in the water utility sector, public assistance dollars have basically gone to pay for systems that have had a fair amount of deferred maintenance that were already in high risk areas. So a lot of jurisdictions said, you know what, we've got a ton of deferred maintenance here. We know we're going to get hit with a hurricane in the next couple of years. We don't know how or when, but it's coming, and we know roughly in the next decade it's for sure coming.
Yeah.
So we're probably not going to put up as much money because we know the federal government's going to come in and bail us out on this. And, you know, that's a little bit of a rhetorical overstatement, but they know where the money's coming from. And I think that, you know, that set up a bad situation, right? Because then you have continuity of service. You start building on those trunk lines and everything else that ties into that. You're not really thinking strategically about decommissioning assets, right? You're trying to maintain what you have. And the federal government hasn't really facilitated the decommissioning of assets and moving things around like we've seen in Broward County, Miami-Dade County again. But at the end of the day, those public assistance dollars are probably at FEMA, my guess, in Washington, what's going to happen is get converted to a block grant program. So Washington's going to come in and said, you know, we're not going to play this game of state hazard mitigation and then public assistance after the fact. We're just going to give you some kind of block grant program and you do what you want with it, limited strings attached. That sounds all good and great, but a lot of states just don't have the capacity. I mean, take Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi. These smaller states really just don't have the in-house capacity to be able to put those dollars to work. So basically, they're going to privatize these things. They're going to go to big contractors, big A&E conglomerates, AEC conglomerates, and they're going to basically privatize the workforce. And we're just going to see, I mean, this is what's happened in this country is we're privatizing assets and we're socializing liabilities. And we're going to continue to see privatization in the water sector. And there's good and bad things about that. I don't want to fully come down and say, oh, privatization of water is a bad thing. There's plenty of good examples where it's been quite successful. But I think we need to step back and say, all right, really, who's taking on these liabilities? And at the state level, the states, I think, are going to be stuck. You know, if you're California, you might be all right. But if you're Louisiana, you're going to be in a really, really tough position. And at the end of the day, water quality is going to be the ultimate consequence of this inability to execute.
Yeah, and you mentioned some states there that are, and hurricanes specifically, you talked about that are impacted by that sort of thing. What about on the other side of the coin with respect to climate change, and that would be water scarcity and availability? Can you talk about how that's going to affect municipalities across the U.S.?
Well, it's really hard to know. I mean, the problem with climate change is we either have too much water or not enough, right? It's the seasonal variability, it's the recharging cycles, it's the whole water cycle itself is getting thrown off. So it's, seasonal cost variation, wholesale cost. I mean, the economy behind it, not just the water rights and property rights behind water, but the entire economy and the time sequencing of these transactions is being thrown off because of variation in precipitation, largely of all sorts. So it's really hard to know, but I think ultimately we can look to Phoenix, Arizona, and Maricopa. I think that's Maricopa County, and say, all right, well, you know what? We're just going to have to put a stop on development. We're going to have to put some absolute constraints on withdrawals. We're really going to have to enforce these withdrawal permits as it stands. And things like, as you started off the show with water recycling, are just going to have to become more and more important. And we're going to have mandates, and you're going to have to put the money into those programs, whether you like it or not.
I mean, there's a lot of higher up levels of government that are trying to change and adapt and sort of go with what they feel is the right direction here. But more specifically, I'm going to center around local municipalities. So, either you, Edgar, or you, Jesse, if you could chime in here, are we seeing municipalities at that level, like, the city of New York or the town of Baton Rouge or and any municipality in between? Are we seeing them adapt? I mean, do they recognize that droughts and floods and extreme weather is all happening more frequently? Like what adjustments are they making?
Well, maybe I can chime in here, and I think it relates to some extent to the question to Jesse. What do we see with federal changes? There's more urgency, I think, for local governance, including cities, to prepare themselves. And as much as there's a lot to say for changing rules as circumstances change, I think the responsibility is pushed to other levels of governance, and that might not be a bad thing. And to quite an extent, we see how counties, cities, definitely like New York City, you may see the background behind. Cities like New York, Boston, Miami, Houston, San Francisco, they're all stepping up as it comes to adaptation. That means they understand risk in a lot of detail. They know future climate risk scenarios. They have all kinds of planning protocols to see what is coming, and are translating that to the processes they need to adapt. And with adapt, I literally mean getting the shovel in the ground. And talking about the New York City example, the big U to protect Manhattan is a great global iconic showcase to that. We started the process 12 years ago after Hurricane Sandy. 10 years of planning in the making to address storm surge and now also extreme precipitation following Hurricane Ida 2 years ago. So it takes a lot of time, and having data, having the right tools to predict to what is coming, and basically you have a smart plan in place, a plan that is also flexible, and that would allow for changes over time if circumstances become more challenging. I think that is what cities are doing. And maybe an observation from travels throughout the U.S. This is not something that the bigger cities are taking on. Many smaller municipalities, say along the East Coast, they're all challenged in the same way. I think what they are lacking is the process on get organized themselves, because they have competing interests, a lot they need to take care of. And this is just one of the struggles, the challenges that they're facing. And so I think that requires special attention, and maybe also responsibility that bigger economic regions need to take on. We should not forget about satellite communities who, in a way, they're part of the same play, the same economic conversation. So let's not forget about the bordering municipalities. Let's make a plan together and think more regionally, think more holistically, in an integrated fashion, a systems way to providing solutions at scale. And that often means, you need to work and plan into the country, literally, away from, maybe like what you would consider a hotspot. We need to plan bigger. We need to plan much bolder, and it should be integrated and should be an all hands effort with all stakeholders involved.
You know, when we talk about local municipalities, so we talked a lot earlier in the show, in the segment around, you know, federal funds and how they sort of trickle down to for certain initiatives on a local level. I don't think Kevin and I have ever come across an overfunded municipality. I don't know if either of you have. Have you ever come across a municipality that said, "Hey, we got all the money in the world, so we can certainly make all this a priority"?
Well, this is, I would say, something where adaptation can be a fantastic playing ground. You know, adaptation done right is such an incubator for positive change, and that is that drives a continuation into the future. So it's not just a one-off. You know, you invest because your infrastructure is crippling or falling apart behind you. No, you are part of a positive movement and creating future-driven momentum, and that beholds a lot of opportunity. I mean, we all know that investing in resilience pays off. We've known that for a long time. Nevertheless, we tend to invest when something literally is falling to pieces, and that is not the right approach as it comes to resilience planning and adaptation. You need to be ahead of the curve. You need to understand your risk. You need to learn from other places. What are other cities doing? What are best practices from around the globe? And maybe just to give an example here on risk, right? We tend to be blindfolded by, say, a floodplain in the US. You know, what does the 100-year floodplain mean, actually? Where there's other ways to explain risk. You know, the Dutch people have a so-called survival threshold, which is a once in 100,000 statistic given to each person in the country. And it's literally a living or dying threshold that is given to every citizen. That means if your statistic is below that, you are eligible for a solution. They need to upgrade the levy system. So it's a very different way of understanding risk and being able to compare apples to apples, also in a much more equitable way. You know, you have a direct insight on which communities score high when it comes to safety and which communities don't. So I think there's, a lot of learning still to happen. Of course, politically, having a survival threshold wouldn't go well, say, speaking for the Army Corps or any agency for that matter. But I mean, it speaks to learning about experiences.
I mean, Edgar, I hear you. But I want to go back to Travis's commentary about overfunding, underfunding. I mean, at the end of the day, we live in a property rights market-based system where people are fundamentally on their own. And they're on their own now with the withdrawal of the federal government more so than ever. And what we see now is the municipal bond market, insurance, mortgages, the financial economy is telling us where the risks are and aren't. And that extends not just to consumers and homeowners and renters and people in the primary consumption. It extends to utilities. And utilities are going to have to disinvest and decommission as much as they're having to think about where they invest, right? It works in both directions. And I think what we're going to see is more strategic decommissioning of assets and really thinking long-term about land use and about our operations. And Edgar is absolutely correct. There's a whole technical area here in civil engineering and systems engineering in resilience and engineering resilience. And it adds value, right? It reduces your OpEx. It reduces your long-term residual risks and casualty and average annual loss and a slew of things that we can quantify and add value. But at the end of the day, for as much as there's a case that we have to make for investment, and that's going to happen, there's also a case we have to think about in terms of disinvestment. And that's a tough decision about who gets served. And that means level of service standards are going to have to be changed and altered all around this country. I mean, we have some states that require level of service standards in very, very high risk areas where it makes zero economic sense to service a particular area, right? And we have other areas that allow the utilities to back up or the local government to back up and move away from universal service in that context. So there's a lot of pain ahead of us, but there's also a lot of economic opportunity.
So it's almost like you're saying, both of you are saying, instead of playing defense, right, and just trying to fix things as you can, as you get funding and as they break, almost go on offense. And that part of that offense could include decommissioning of some systems. but it could also include and should include looking forward and making investments and how you could be more sustainable. If you go down that route, making sure your OpEx is then theoretically, if you do it right, should go down. And I'm glad you brought up the idea of water resiliency because, as I mentioned, we started off talking on a federal level, then we went down to a municipal level. And I even want to kind of go even more specific than that. So, I mean, within every municipality, there exists property, real estate, buildings, privately owned land, but they utilize public systems for their water. So, through your experience, can you talk on the topic of efficiency in buildings and real estate, specifically private homes, community centers, that type of thing, and in terms of sustainability and water resiliency?
It's actually super simple. When it comes to sustainability in buildings, building codes work. They work for energy efficiency, but they definitely work for water efficiency.
Okay.
It takes very little investment in either retrofitting buildings or in new construction. I mean, like it basically, there's no additional marginal cost. It's
Right.
basically the same cost now. For fixtures and plumbing and very easy things that basically just change your flow rates, that can reduce the standard water consumption by 40 to 50%. 40% is sort of the benchmark. So it's now completely standardized in design basically all new buildings and most retrofits, either by code or by choice, to significantly reduce your water. Now, there's strange things that come up. Like, you've probably been to a hotel and they change the flow rate on your shower head and it's awful.
Yes.
You know
Yep.
what? I hate that. I personally, I want as much water pressure that
Yep.
it just peels off every last molecule of oil on my face.
Yes.
That's what I want. I want
Yep.
like a fire hose level water pressure.
Mhm.
But what's interesting? What they found in behavioral studies is that when you reduce the flow rate, people take longer showers. And you actually end up burning more energy and using more
Interesting.
water because you're trying to get clean and you can't because you just have a soft mist in your hair.
Interesting
So,
study. I wonder how they
Yeah.
did
yeah,
that.
so
That's in a high flow.
there's always unintended consequences. The other part of this is that water efficiency has been so good, it's so easy to do that it's actually impacted utility rates for utilities because they're borrowing money over CapEx investments over very long periods of time, right? They've got to bring water, if you're in New York City or San Francisco, you're bringing water in from hundreds of miles. These are massive long-term investments. So when you start seeing declines in revenue, right, faster than you can keep up with the utility rate growth, it starts to become a problem. And this is actually something that's crept up with utilities all around the country, is that water efficiency is a little bit too good. But in the context of scarcity, of course, it matters at the end of the day. And I think we're increasingly finding balance. But the good news is it's the same cost and it really works. And you can cut your water use relative to standards conventions by half very easily.
Right. So taking it from the very local, as in one's personal shower, back up to somewhat of a more municipal, broader view.
You can't get more granular than being in somebody's shower
really
and collecting data. But go ahead.
We go there.
Right.
But on a higher level, and this may be a broad question, but we have a broad audience. When you talk about increasing resilience, are there some key areas that we can talk about and focus on for how you would do that?
Yeah, I mean, and I was, I'm still digesting the previous answer by Jesse, which is a bit of the question was a bit end of pipe, right? We like to think more upstream and what
Right.
sustainable truly means as we shape our cities, where zoning is a fantastic tool, so you can avoid all these costly mistakes further down the road, which includes, I think, say a topic like buyouts, right? What is the right place to build in the first place, and how should we transition our way out of certain places? That is what is ahead of us and what is driving, I think, city governance more and more, and what is driving the industry as well. But I think to your question, I mean, we've touched on quite a bit already. I think it's obvious we need to plan for the extreme. So as you understand risk play with that risk dashboard, if you will. If this is your current situation, like the norm, think beyond the norm, double, triple the norm. If you think 2 inches is a big rainstorm, well, make it 20 and see what happens in your urban landscape, and see how streets start to behave, how rivers streets turn into rivers. And then, when we kicked off this conversation, I live fairly high in Manhattan myself. But when I saw Hurricane Ida come through our neighborhood, it turned the subway into a place where you could not be safely. So I think that is what is ahead of us. Plan for extreme circumstances, and plan long term. As we start to identify solutions, say 20, 30 years ahead, these have short-term implications, things that you need to do already to anticipate that future. So that is another, I think, aspect. And as we understand risk, probability multiplied by consequence, I think we have a range of tools these days. And just looking at my own company, Arcadis, Climate Risk Nexus is one of these tools. Overlay that risk profile with your urban landscape to truly understand what the implications are, as you can play with that climate scenario dashboard. And that is smart planning. And I think we'll make big steps also through AI in smart planning to come. And I think what is holding us back, of course, funding policies. What do you regulate by law? How do you communicate is vitally important. If that is not in place, if you don't celebrate small success, the big success will never come. So don't forget about that either. Pilot projects, we tend to focus on success, and as a result, I don't like to make mistakes. There's a big legal consequence to that. Let's not be afraid to make mistakes, right? As we teach our children and we educate the new workforce, it's all about making mistakes, learn from it. Why do the Dutch have such a fantastic system? Because we failed for 1,000 years. Let's not forget about that. There's like 1 million casualties over the course of hundreds of years. And that's why the Dutch have such a fantastic system, costly system, but up to a very high standard. So if you get to work, if you celebrate success, if you know how the system works, and you can allow yourself for integrated planning, bringing all the voices to the table, working with people, participatory planning is how we would call that. But I think you have all incentives for success, Travis.
Great answer.
Jesse, any final thoughts on the topic of resiliency in water and wastewater systems?
Engineering resilience in water and wastewater is a vast playbook, right? It's culvert sizing, right, for varying ranges of precipitation. Right. It's handling greater sedimentation rates. It's adding extra amps and volts for the pumps, right? It's about flow. It's about range. It's about extreme dry periods and biomass management, right? So that water can flow when it needs to flow, and we're not dumping, turning things into muddy areas. It's about compound events, right? The relationship between floods and other dependent infrastructure systems like electricity and communications, for instance, which we do a ton of work on. So the playbook is vast. It's an extremely well-developed technical area. All of your listeners already know who's doing what. They already have developed a lot of knowledge on this. They are getting a sense of the costs and the returns and the value add. It doesn't work every time. And as Edgar said, a lot of this is also just land use, right? It's where you're offering service. It's where you're building. It's who you're really servicing. So the good news is we actually have a lot of technical development. This isn't just fluff rhetoric. We're going to save the world and altruism and kumbaya. We know what we're doing. We have a lot of experience. We benefit from people like Edgar and from the Dutch, but people from all around the world who are facing similar challenges. So we've got the tools, right? And we got to figure out how to spend our money wisely, and we're going to have to figure out how to spend it even more wisely. But the goal at the end of the day is to keep people from paying enormous water bills, right? We're in many places in this country, we're looking at a 10x increase in the cost of water, right? A 10x increase in the cost of water. Many people, 50% of the people who live in New Orleans pay something like upwards of 20% of their take-home pay on water.
Oh my gosh.
Right. And guess what? Non-revenue water in New Orleans is like 50 to 60%.
Wow. Holy.
So at the end of the day, we've got challenges, but we need drinking water, not just to drink and to water our lawns and to cook pasta, but for our own economy. And we have millions of jobs that are dependent on the flow of clean water in this country and the processing of wastewater, et cetera, et cetera. So it's about economic development. And it's not just communities and kumbaya and making people feel better. This is a core economic development argument. We either get it together or we don't.
I'm charged up. I don't know about you, Kevin, but like I feel like we were just in a halftime speech, and I'm ready to break through the ball here and go out and go on offense. Right?
Let's get to work.
Yeah, let's do it, gentlemen. I cannot thank you enough for coming on air with us here. Edgar, Jesse, much appreciated. Such good information in there. I can't begin to thank you enough. Cannot wait to have you back on the Water Online show. For all of you out there listening, we appreciate you spending your time here with us, and we can't wait to have you back and see what we got in store for you next time. Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.